It was a warm spring day in New York City, the kind of day where the air felt fresh. People walked a little lighter. The trees in Central Park were getting their green back. Everything felt normal, and the New York Zoo, right there in the park, was busy. Kids were laughing. Parents were pushing strollers. They all loved seeing the animals. The lions were sleeping in the sun. Monkeys chattered in their enclosures. The elephants moved slowly. It was a place of joy, a place of wonder, a place where city life faded a little. People forgot their worries for a while. But that day, something strange was brewing. Not inside the zoo itself, not with the animals, but in the city's newspapers. New York had many papers back then. Some were serious. They reported the facts. Others were a bit wilder. They liked to tell big stories. Sometimes these stories were not entirely true. They stretched things, they made things up, just to sell more copies. It was a competitive world. Every paper wanted attention. One of these papers was known for its sensational tales. It wasn't the biggest, it wasn't the most respected. But it knew how to get people talking. Its editors, I think, were always looking for a splash. Something that would make everyone gasp, something that would get their paper picked up by more hands. They didn't really care if it was true. They cared if it was interesting and if it made money. So, on this particular day, someone had an idea. A really wild idea. What if they printed something truly unbelievable? Something that would shake things up, something about the zoo. The zoo was a beloved place. Everyone knew it. Everyone had an opinion about it, and everyone would read a story about it, especially a bad one. They sat in a smoky office. The smell of old paper and ink was strong. Ideas flew around, each one crazier than the last. Someone joked about a bear escaping. Someone else said a lion. But those were too common, too easy to check. They needed something bigger, something more dramatic. A whole group of animals all at once. That would be a story. That would sell papers. They laughed about it first. It was just a joke. A bit of fun. A way to blow off steam. But then one editor, I think his name was Arthur, he started to think, what if? What if they really did it? What if they wrote a story so wild, so outrageous, that people would actually believe it? Even for a little while. The thought was exciting to him. It was mischievous. It felt like a challenge. Arthur started sketching things out on a notepad. He wrote down animal names. He thought about how they might escape, what kind of chaos they could cause. It was like he was writing a movie script, but it was for the morning paper. He imagined the headlines, big, bold letters, screaming at people from the newsstands. He pictured the faces of the readers, shocked, amazed, a little scared. The other editors were skeptical at first. It was a big risk. What if they got caught? What if people got mad? But Arthur was good at convincing people. He told them it was harmless. It was just a bit of fun. A social experiment to see how gullible people were. He said it would show how quickly rumors spread. He made it sound like they were doing something important, not just being irresponsible. And so the plan took shape. It wasn't just one animal. It was many. Not just one escape. It was a mass breakout, and not just any animals. But the most dangerous ones, the ones that would cause the most fear, they picked lions. They picked tigers, they picked bears, they even threw in some smaller but still scary animals, like wolves. It was a menagerie of mayhem, a symphony of terror, or so they hoped. They worked late into the night, writing the story, making it sound official. They invented fake quotes from zookeepers. They made up details about broken cages. They even drew a crude map. It showed the supposed escape routes. It showed where the animals were headed, right into the heart of the city, right towards people's homes. It was all fiction, every single word, but they worked hard to make it feel real, to make it feel urgent. The story was long, full of details. It described the sounds of the escape, the roars, the growls, the breaking metal. It painted a picture of chaos, a picture of danger. It said the police were overwhelmed, that the city was not safe. It warned people to stay inside, to lock their doors, to protect their families. It was designed to scare people, to make them believe something terrible was happening. They finished the story. They sent it to the typesetters. The presses would run overnight. By morning, the papers would be on the streets. But Arthur felt a thrill, a mix of excitement and nerves. He knew he was doing something bold, something that would cause a stir. He didn't really think about the consequences. Not yet. He just thought about the sales figures. He thought about the talk, the buzz, the headlines. He thought about being the one who started it all. He just wanted to see what would happen. He wanted to see if his wild story could make a real splash in the big city. He wanted to see if he could trick everyone. The next morning, the papers hit the streets. They were everywhere. Newsboys shouted the headlines. People bought them, they unfolded them, and they saw the big, bold letters, the shocking words. The story about the escaped animals from the New York Zoo. It was all there, right on the front page. A lie, a complete fabrication. But it looked so real. It sounded so serious. The city was about to wake up. And not in a good way. And I think even then, Arthur didn't fully grasp what he had set in motion. He just thought it was a bit of a laugh, a clever trick, a way to sell more papers. He had no idea the fear he was about to unleash, the panic he was about to cause, the real trouble that was heading straight for the New York Zoo. He just watched the papers disappear from the stands. One by one, he saw people reading them, their eyes wide, their mouths open, and a small smile played on his lip. It was working. The story spread quickly, faster than anyone expected. It started with the people who bought the newspaper. They read the front page, their eyes grew wide, they whispered to their neighbors. Did you see this? They'd say. Animals escaped from the zoo, and their neighbors would gasp. Some would buy the paper themselves, to see it with their own eyes. Others would just tell the next person they saw. Word of mouth is a powerful thing, especially back then, before radio was common, before television, before the internet. People relied on each other for news, and if someone told you something scary, you usually believed it. Or at least you worried about it. The story about the escaped zoo animals was very scary. It tapped into a primal fear. Wild beasts roaming the city. It sounded like something out of a nightmare. Other newspapers, the more reputable ones, they started to notice. They saw their rivals' sales go up. They saw the public reaction. Some scoffed. They knew this paper often printed nonsense. They tried to debunk it. They printed their own small notices saying the story was false, that the zoo was safe. But these efforts didn't work very well. The fake story was just too exciting, too dramatic. It grabbed people's attention much more. People started calling the zoo. The phone lines got jammed. Are the lions out? They'd ask. Is it true about the tigers? The zoo staff were confused at first. They hadn't seen any escapes. Everything was normal. They told callers it was a hoax, a lie. But the calls kept coming, and they grew more frantic. It was hard to convince people when they'd seen it in print, in a newspaper. Then people started going to the zoo. Not to visit, but to see for themselves, to check if it was safe, or to confirm the panic. Some came armed, with sticks, with pitchforks. I think some even brought old hunting rifles. They were ready to protect themselves and their families. It was a crazy sight. A crowd gathering outside the zoo gates, not for fun, but for fear. The zoo gates were usually open, welcoming, but now they seemed to be a barrier, or maybe a warning. People looked inside nervously. They scanned the trees, the paths. They expected to see a lion or a bear, anything. Their imaginations were running wild, fueled by the fake newspaper story. The zoo director, a kind man named Mr. Henderson, he was beside himself. He couldn't believe what was happening. He had worked at the zoo for years. He loved the animals. He loved the visitors. He had never seen anything like this. He kept telling everyone, "There are no escaped animals." It's not true. But his words were lost in the growing noise, in the mounting fear. The police were called. They sent a few officers first. They thought it was just a small disturbance, a misunderstanding. But when they arrived, they saw the crowd. They heard the shouting. They felt the tension in the air. This was more than a misunderstanding. This was serious. This was a crowd on the edge. The officers tried to calm people down. They said they had checked. The animals were all in their places, safe, secure, but people pointed to the newspaper. It says right here, they argued. It's on the front page. They trusted the print more than the police standing in front of them. It was a strange situation, a battle between truth and a convincing lie. The fake story had details that made it seem real. It mentioned specific enclosures, it talked about certain keepers, it even said some animals had been seen near familiar city landmarks. These small touches made it much harder to dismiss. It made the lie feel heavy. It gave it weight. And the weather didn't help. The bright spring day started to turn gray. Clouds rolled in. A strong wind picked up. It felt like the perfect backdrop for a disaster, for an animal rampage. The mood grew darker, more urgent. People looked up at the sky, then back at the zoo gates. Their faces were full of worry, full of dread. The zoo staff were scared too, not of escaped animals, but of the crowd, of the panic. What if someone got hurt? What if the crowd tried to break in? What if they thought they needed to hunt the animals inside? The situation felt dangerous. It felt out of control. Mr. Henderson gathered his staff. They discussed what to do. They decided to close the zoo early, to put up extra barricades, to try and protect both the animals and the people. But closing the zoo only made things worse. For many, it confirmed their fears. See, they'd say. They're closing it because the animals airy out. It was a terrible choice, but they felt they had no other option. The fake story had truly taken hold. It was no longer just ink on paper, it was a feeling. A real fear that spread from person to person, like a disease. It was a collective anxiety, born from a lie, and it was about to get much, much worse. The sun was setting, and the city was starting to believe in monsters. Monsters that weren't there, but felt very, very real. The zoo, a place of peace, was now the center of a growing storm. A storm of pure manufactured panic. The crowd at the New York Zoo grew thicker. It was like a slow-moving river of worried faces, people pushed and shoved. Everyone wanted to get closer to the gates. They wanted to see, they wanted to know. The air was buzzing with talk. Wild theories flew around. Someone swore they heard a lion's roar. Another person pointed to a shadow, claiming it was a bear. It was all imagination, but the panic made it seem real. Police cars arrived, more of them. Their sirens wailed. This only added to the chaos. It confirmed to many that something was truly wrong. Why else would so many police be there? The officers tried to form a line to keep people back. But the crowd was too large, too agitated. They yelled questions at the police. They waved copies of the fake newspaper. What are you doing about it? They demanded. Protect us? Inside the zoo, the situation was tense. The keepers were trying to feed the animals to keep things normal, but they could hear the noise from outside. The shouting, the sirens. It was unnerving. The animals seemed to sense it too. Some paced in their enclosures. Others made nervous sounds. They were usually calm, but now even they felt the strange energy. Mr. Henderson, the zoo director, was talking frantically on the phone to city officials, to the mayor's office. He tried to explain, he tried to reason. It's a hoax, he kept saying. A malicious lie. But the city was already reacting. People were calling emergency lines. Schools were being advised to keep children indoors. Some businesses were closing early. The panic was spreading far beyond the zoo gates. The newspaper that started it all, the one that printed the fake story, its offices were in a frenzy too. Not of panic, but of excitement. The phones were ringing off the hook. People were buying every single copy. It was a huge success in their eyes. Arthur, the editor who pushed the idea, he felt a rush. He saw the commotion outside. He heard the sirens. He even saw a few people running down the street. It was all a result of his story. He felt powerful. He felt mischievous. But a few of the other editors, I think, started to get nervous. This was bigger than they expected. This wasn't just a laugh. People were genuinely scared. There was real risk now. What if someone got hurt in the crowd? What if the police got aggressive? What if the city decided to take legal action? The fun was starting to wear off. The consequences were starting to look very real. Back at the zoo, the crowd started to get bolder. A few young men, full of bravado and fear, tried to climb the fence. They thought they were helping. They thought they were going to be heroes. To fight off the escaped animals, the police had to intervene. There were scuffles, pushing, shouting. It was very close to turning into a full-blown riot. The sky had grown dark now. Night was falling, the streetlights flickered on, the shadows made everything seem more sinister. Every rustle in the bushes seemed like an approaching beast. Every distant dog bark sounded like a wild animal. The fear was thick. It hung in the air. People started sharing their own sightings. Someone said they saw a lion in Central Park near the boathouse. Another person claimed a bear had smashed a window in a nearby apartment building. These were all invented, all untrue. But in the grip of panic, people believed them. They repeated them. And the lies grew. They mutated. Each retelling added a new detail. A new horror. The police chief arrived at the zoo. He looked grim. He saw the chaos. He talked to Mr. Henderson. He saw the copies of the newspaper being waved around. He understood the problem. It wasn't about finding escaped animals. It was about calming a terrified city. It was about fighting a lie that had become more powerful than the truth. He made a decision. He would use the police to make a clear statement. He would send officers into the zoo to walk every path, to check every enclosure, to show the public that all the animals were there and safe. It was a dangerous move. The crowd might think they're going in to capture something. But he hoped it would work. He hoped it would show the truth. So police officers in uniform carrying flashlights started to walk through the zoo. They went to the lion house, they showed the lions sleeping soundly, they went to the monkey exhibit. The monkeys were chattering, undisturbed, they went to the bear pits, the bears were snuggled in their dens. They did this slowly, methodically, trying to be seen by the people outside, trying to send a message, but the message wasn't getting through quickly enough. The crowd was still in a frenzy. The police officers inside looked small and vulnerable. To some, it just made them think the officers were searching, not proving. It was a losing battle against a very strong emotion, fear. The mayor's office put out an emergency broadcast. Over the few radio stations available, they said the stories were false, they said the zoo was secure. But many people didn't have radios, and those who did, some were already too deep in their fear to believe it. They trusted the newspaper they held in their hands, the one that told them a thrilling, terrifying story. The panic reached its peak late that night. People were barricading their homes. Some neighborhoods were almost deserted. Those who were out were on edge, looking over their shoulders, expecting to see a wild animal. It was an entire city, or a large part of it, gripped by a manufactured terror. All because of a sensationalist newspaper and a very convincing lie. And I think that night, New York City learned a harsh lesson about what a piece of paper full of untruths could really do. It was a real wake-up call for everyone. The night felt endless. The panic slowly began to die down as the hours passed. It was like a fever breaking, very gradually. The constant police presence at the zoo and the repeated radio announcements, they started to chip away at the belief in the fake story. People were tired, their adrenaline was wearing off, and they hadn't seen a single escaped animal. Not one. By morning, the crowd at the zoo had thinned out. Only a few stragglers remained. Looking confused, a little embarrassed, the sun came up, it was another bright spring day. And the city looked normal again. The streets were quiet, the usual sounds of morning started up. In delivery wagons, people heading to work. It was as if the night of terror had been a dream. A bad dream. But it wasn't a dream, it was very real, and there were consequences. The city officials were furious. The mayor spoke to the press. He condemned the newspaper. He called it reckless, irresponsible. He said they had caused unnecessary fear, and they had tied up valuable city resources. Police, firefighters, emergency services, all because of a lie. The newspaper that printed the fake story, it was in deep trouble. The public anger turned quickly from the zoo to them. People felt foolish, they felt tricked, and they didn't like that feeling. They demanded apologies. They demanded answers. Sales had soared the day before. But now, people were refusing to buy the paper. They were canceling subscriptions. The editors who had been so excited, so proud of their hoax, they were now facing a very different reality. Arthur, the editor who pushed the idea, he was called into the owner's office. He was yelled at. He was accused of damaging the paper's reputation beyond repair. They might have sold a lot of copies for one day, but they had lost trust. And trust for a newspaper is everything, even a sensational one. He faced serious repercussions, and I think, for the first time, he really understood the weight of his actions. The fun had turned sour. The zoo director, Mr. Henderson, he was exhausted, but relieved. He spent the entire next day reassuring visitors, showing them that the animals were all there, that everything was safe. He talked to every person he could. He brought out a few of the more friendly animals to show their peaceful nature, to rebuild trust. It took a long time for the zoo to feel truly normal again, for the shadow of the fake story to lift completely. The incident became a major talking point in New York and beyond. People debated it. They discussed how quickly a lie could spread, how easily people could be manipulated. It raised serious questions about the role of newspapers, about their responsibility to the truth. Some people argued that the public should have known better, that the story was too outlandish to believe. But others pointed out how convincing it had been, how it tapped into real anxieties. And lessons were learned, I think, or at least they were discussed. Newspapers started to be more careful, at least for a while. The idea of fact-checking gained more importance. People understood that not everything printed on paper was true, that some sources were less reliable than others. It was a rude awakening for many. The fake story caused a significant financial cost, too, for the city, for businesses that closed, for the zoo itself, and it caused emotional distress for countless people. It showed the power of misinformation. It showed how a simple lie, told convincingly enough, could bring a whole city to a standstill, could cause real, widespread fear. Over time, the memory of the New York Zoo panic faded a bit. It became a story people told, a warning, a strange historical event. But for those who lived through it, especially those at the zoo or the editors at the newspaper, it left a lasting mark. It was a stark reminder of the fragile line between entertainment and irresponsibility, between a good story and a dangerous lie. And I think even today, when we hear wild stories, when we see things spread quickly, we can still learn from what happened that spring day in New York. We can remember how easy it is to believe something scary, how important it is to ask questions, to check the facts, and to not let fear rule our decisions, because sometimes the biggest danger isn't the lion that's escaped, but the lie that's been printed, the one that tells you the lion is coming, even when it's still fast asleep in its cage. The aftermath was complex. Not everyone moved on easily. The city had been shaken. People looked at their morning papers with a new kind of suspicion. They questioned headlines more. They started to wonder what else they might have believed without proof. This skepticism was a good thing in some ways. It made people think more critically, but it also eroded a bit of trust in the media generally. The newspaper that published the hoax eventually faced serious legal action. The city sued them for the costs incurred during the panic. Other, more ethical newspapers piled on. They condemned their rivals' actions. This created a lasting stain on their reputation. Their readership never fully recovered. The financial success of that single day of high sales was quickly overshadowed by years of struggle. The editor, Arthur, he lost his job. His career in journalism was effectively over. He became a cautionary tale among writers, a reminder of what not to do. For the zoo, the healing process was slow. They had to work hard to rebuild their image, to assure the public that their security was top-notch, that their animals were loved and safely housed. They held open days. They invited people behind the scenes. They wanted to show transparency. They wanted to prove that their commitment to animal welfare and public safety was unwavering. The community rallied around the zoo. Many New Yorkers felt a sense of pride in their zoo, and they wanted to support it, especially after it had been unfairly targeted. The animals, I think, were the least affected in the grand scheme of things. They continued their lives in their enclosures, mostly unaware of the human drama that had unfolded around them. They received their food, they slept, they played. Their routines were only briefly interrupted by the heightened noise and activity. They were just animals living their lives, while humans made up stories and got scared. The New York Zoo panic, as it came to be known, became a legend, a weird, almost unbelievable story that people would tell. Grandparents would tell their grandkids, "Did you know that once people thought lions were running through Central Park?" It became a fable, a lesson in the dangers of yellow journalism, a term for sensational and often untrue reporting. It highlighted a key vulnerability in society, how easily mass hysteria can take hold. How a piece of paper, a simple printed word, can become a weapon of fear. It showed that truth, when faced with a compelling lie, doesn't always win immediately. It has to fight. It has to be proven. And that takes time and effort. And it also showed the resilience of New Yorkers. After the initial panic, they scoffed at themselves a little. They laughed at their own gullibility. And then they moved on. They went back to the zoo. They enjoyed the park. They learned to be a bit more cynical, a bit more discerning. The event, though born of a malicious prank, ended up having a long-term impact on how news was consumed and produced. It contributed to a greater demand for accuracy in reporting. It reminded journalists of their immense power and their immense responsibility. It showed that words, once released, cannot be easily taken back, and their impact can be far-reaching, and sometimes truly frightening. So when we think about that fake newspaper story and the panic it caused at the New York Zoo, I think it stands as a clear reminder. A reminder that in the clamor of information, real and fake, our ability to think critically is our most important tool. It's about remembering that not every headline is a fact, and not every sensation is the truth. It's about making sure we don't let ourselves be scared by things that aren't really there, by the wild animals that only exist on a printed page. And that's a lesson that remains important even all these years later. It's a simple, clear message. Be careful what you believe.